I was hiking in the Superstition Mountains, which already have creepy stories of their own. There were no other cars in the parking lot or dirt area, so I was just with my dog. The trail I was following got confusing, and I was led to a fence where it just seemed to end. The sun started to set, so I decided to turn around anyways. Looking back, it was really stupid of me to go hiking alone, and this late in the day too. But when I turned around to walk away, I heard something behind me, so I turned to look. I saw an older man with grey hair, a red button-up shirt, and jeans. It wasn't really what you go out and hike in. He had no hat or backpack or anything on him. He was walking toward the actual Superstition Mountain on the other side of the fence. I only saw his back, and he never turned around. It was weird because he literally was not there 1 second, and then the next thing, he was. He wasn't walking on any type of trail or anything either. He was just going straight through the desert. Then I started to feel the leash I was holding going taut. My dog was literally shaking and was beginning to growl, low at first, but growing increasingly louder. Not at the man though. My dog was turned towards where my back was facing. I tried looking around, but there was nothing there. I was trying to calm her down, but she just would not. And then when I turned back, the man was inches away from my fucking face. I got the biggest fright of my life. It's weird though, because even though he was so close, his facial features were like blurry. It was like I could not see straight, and my brain was filling in the blanks. Like when you try to look at someone through your peripheral vision, and your brain has to fill in details but can't actually see clearly. This man or thing or whatever was wearing this bright red shirt, that is something that sticks out in my memory. I am like frozen in place at this point. My dog is growling and trying to pull me towards something the other way. The man takes a step back to put some space between us. Then he starts to ever so slowly reach out his hand/arm towards me. I am trying to move, but I am fixed to the spot. My legs won't work anymore. It's like everything except for my eyes are paralyzed. He eventually reaches out all the way with his hand, pointing at my chest. And then boom. With one swift movement, his hand is now fucking through my chest. Like, his hand has just directly phased through it. Like this guy is a fucking ghost or something, which is not possible. He looks as real as anything. I feel a cold sensation in my chest at first, and then a searing, burning sensation. My body starts to shake. This guy's face, though, is starting to become unblurred. I wish it hadn't, because it was blank. He did not have eyes. He had like skin grown over where the eyes should have been. He had no nose, no hair, no ears, but he did have lips. He did not open them, but they formed this slight smirk. He took his hand out, and my legs just gave in, and I hit the floor. I did not pass out though. It took me about 15 minutes to calm myself down and slow my breathing. All the while, my dog was trying to drag me off. When I managed to stand back up, this guy was gone. There weren't even any tracks left behind. It was like there was no sign of him at all. I just rushed back to my car and I had to yank my dog the whole way. There was still no cars in the lot when I got there. When I got back to my car, the clock told me I had been out there for about 2 hours more than I thought I had been. I've tried to tell this story to people, but they will not believe me. I've asked all of my friends and all of my family, and they think I was just dehydrated and had a hallucination or something, but that is not true. I had been gulping water all day long, and I cannot get the feeling of his hand piercing my chest out of my mind. I can still feel it. The pierce, followed by the deep cold, and then the searing burn. Anyone who has been around this area have any fucking clue as to what happened to me. This happened on a pretty isolated island. On that island is a man-made lake in GA that is about a mile long and roughly 200 to 300 feet wide. It's also completely covered in woods. I was walking around and exploring when I fell into a hole in the earth. This hole was completely invisible to the naked eye beneath layers of dry leaves. It had obviously been concealed for many years. It was 2004 when I literally stumbled into this. It looked like it had been hidden beneath seasons of dead leaves and dirt for over a decade. I grew up across the shore and knew no one ever really visited this island except for the multitude of wildlife that inhabited it. The hole was perfectly square in shape, about 4 feet by 4 feet and only about 6 to 7 feet deep. This hole was not fucking empty though. When I landed hard and hurt my leg because there was some kind of old and rusted metal hatch down here. It looked like it had not been opened for many years. The hatch itself was only about 2 feet by 2 feet. I maneuvered around as best as I could to contort my body to an angle where I could get down low. I had my ear practically up to this thing, and just before I did anything, I heard a tap, tap, tap. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to startle me. Like an idiot, I actually knocked back. I waited for 2 minutes and nothing. I put my hand on the hatch to get ready to open it, and there it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Louder and more forceful this time though. I closed my eyes, held my breath, and just yanked it open. If I didn't do this, I knew I would be frozen there forever. This thing was so old and so brittle, the entire covering just gave way and came off. This thing must have been really old. The smell was awful. The gap beneath was not even very large, maybe like 2 feet deep or so. There were belongings in here. There were a pair of small shoes. They were too small to be anything but children's shoes. There was also something in saran wrap. I think it what was once a sandwich, but it had now rotted and was causing the smell. I instinctually threw that shit far, far behind me and out of the hole. Aside from the shoes and the sandwich, there was an old blanket in there. A very old blanket that you would give to a baby. It was very aged and had a funky smell to it, but that could have just been because of the rotting food. The germaphobe in me was not very happy, but I had already touched the rotting food, so I picked up the blanket. I about shit my pants when an old and rusted revolver dropped out when I picked it up. It was a 6-shot 38, and it looked completely rusted. It must have sat buried under here for years. I had to fight to get the cylinder to open, but when I did, I found out that there was still 1 round loaded. I did not want to fuck around with this shit. I put that shit right back and managed to scramble my way out of the hole. I later left an anonymous tip with the police because no way I was spending my time being questioned about this shit. I just didn't want to know. That shit did not sit right with me. I'm late to the party, but here's my story. I grew up in the Ozarks. I spent a lot of my childhood exploring the woods, creeks, springs, etc. My uncle used to take my sister and I camping near a lake with a huge group of his friends and their kids. Inevitably, we would always want to go and explore. So we were walking a trail one day. It was a marked trail that people use all the time. We found a deer trail and decided to follow it. Eventually, it became an actual trail, and then it suddenly was like an actual pathway and less of a trail. The edges were all lined with rocks, and the path itself had flat rocks embedded in the earth. We followed the path for what felt like forever, and it eventually led to a clearing in the woods. The clearing had a round brick-lined campfire and sitting logs around it. The clearing was obviously maintained, and it stretched quite a bit out beyond the log circle. In one corner of beyond the clearing was a building with a path like the last one leading up to it. It seemed really old and out of place compared to how well everything else was taken care of, so we went and checked it out. Old homesteads and bonfires in the woods are not uncommon here, so it really wasn't that scary or weird for us. A lot of people use them as hunting cabins. So at this point, we were scared of being caught on someone's land more than anything else. We got to the cabin, and it was locked. Windows were all covered from the inside, but we noticed a weird peephole kind of thing in a side door. Not the glass modern kind, but the kind that you would see at an old speakeasy, where they actually open a piece of the door. It had a little cage around it and everything, So we found a piece of wood and stood on it to see if we could push it open, and it actually opened. Inside was the weirdest shit. It could only be described as a throne room. One big throne on a pedestal, 2 on either side of it. The rest of the room was completely empty. No cabinets, no chairs, no tables. It was, bizarre. As little kids, we thought it was the coolest shit ever, like someone royal lives there or something, but we also were not super dumb. Obviously, this is not an abandoned homestead or a hunting cabin, so we got the fuck out of there. We told our uncle about it, and he just kinda brushed it off. Found out years later, he knew the guy that owns the land. That is why we camped where we did. He owned all the land in that area up to the lake. Apparently, he was part of a secret society/fraternity thing, and the cabin and log circle was some element of that. This made it way more creepy. We never found out which one, because my uncle said he did not know, and it was not his business. He used that land to hunt, so I don't think he wanted to pry too hard. Or maybe he did know, and he just didn't want to tell us. Definitely the weirdest thing I've stumbled across in the woods. I lived in southeast Michigan until I was 17 years old. I frequently stayed with an aunt who lived a few blocks away from a filthy river beneath some old train tracks. All of the local kids hung out there occasionally. It was mainly preteens or early high school kids to do drugs, hook up, or practice shitty graffiti. There were also homeless people on occasion, but it became less common with so many kids using the area for themselves. Kids reported cars following them to the area or sitting in a nearby parking lot and watching them. I personally had never heard of any sort of altercations or attempted kidnappings, just downriver creeps. This was late middle school/early high school. I would visit the river and tracks with friends. It is wooded, but lightly. The woods are filled with steep hills, so generally, people did not venture into them. You could cut through the woods to get onto the train tracks/bridge, but it was a pain in the ass, and most people opted to walk to the tracks via the street. Anyway, I was with 2 friends, trudging through the woods so that we could hang out on the tracks/bridge rather than by the water. I noticed a black plastic bag hanging from a branch on a tree. It had been tied closed. We just could not help ourselves and wanted to know what could be inside. We took 2 sticks to remove the bag from the tree. It was very light. We used the stick to tear a hole in the bag, then stretched/pulled it open. We found a pair of boys/youth underwear. They were a plain gray/black, but too small to be men's, covered in a dry, rust-colored substance. Whatever it was, we assumed blood. It was all over the underwear. I don't remember any scent, but I recall how the underwear seemed so stiff from the blood. We were able to remove the underwear from the bag, and also found a small pocket knife, which also had that same substance on it, but was mostly clean. It freaked the 3 of us out, of course. We were so spooked by this that we immediately decided it was time to leave once we fully processed what we were seeing. We left the bag, underwear, and knife on the ground in the woods, and just went home. So about 2 weeks ago, this young guy gets moved over to the store I work at from a different local, and one day, we were sitting in the lunchroom, and the subject of Bigfoot comes up. He is actually quite interested, so I ask him if he knows anyone with a good story. He responds, not about Bigfoot, but my cousin was on a hunting trip in Mexico, and shot something weird. Oh really? I have to hear this, I tell him. He says yeah, I even have a picture of it on my phone. The following is all that he could remember. This trip happened about 2 years ago, near the Texas-Mexico border on the Mexico side. There was a group of 4 or 5 guys that have hunted together on trips for the last 20 years. On this particular occasion, they had hunted that day without much success, and were sitting around the fire after a good meal. They were just having a couple of beers. At some point around midnight, they began to hear this strange chattering/barking sounds. It was unlike anything they had ever heard before. It was creepy and unnerving, and continued on until they decided to go and investigate. A couple grabbed lights, and a couple others grabbed rifles. They moved toward the sound until they were about 100 yards away from the camp. They could hear the sounds coming from up in a tree. So at this point, the two guys with lights lit up the tray, and to their amazement, there were 3 sets of eyes peering back and bobbing around, trying to look at them. They knew that these were not a raccoon or a possum or anything else they had ever seen up in a tray. The men decided to take one. They fired and killed it. The other 2 bailed in the other direction into the darkness and were gone. Once the men got the animal back to the campsite and really looked it over, they just could not figure out what they were looking at. The photo here was from that night. The next morning, they wanted an answer, so they called the Mexican authorities. I could not determine if it was police or a form of Mexican fish and game, but I think the latter. When they showed up, the 2 authorities quickly looked it over and gave the men such a stupid story, I won't even repeat it all. But in short, they said it was missing fur on certain areas of its body because it was partially digested. What the fuck, I know. That is when the hunters fought to try and tell them. They said they just shot it and that it looked like that when it was alive. Very quickly, they were told they were not supposed to have it and it was confiscated. They just took the fucking corpse. End of story. I guess there are still many mysteries left unexplained out there. When I was a teenager, I went to Bamfield, BC with my best friend to meet her boyfriend. The previous summer, her dad had restored an old house out there. She ended up getting close with a lot of the local kids and learned a ton about coastal life. I, on the other hand, grew up pretty landlocked and was always terrified of sharks and other things that go bump in the sea. She knew this. She invites me out with her when she decided to spend the next summer there as well. She thinks it's a good idea to suggest we camp on the beach for the night with the other kids. All good. Sounds like a blast. I pack a bag and we leave the house to make our way to the beach. Instead, we arrive at the dock and she tells me to get into this little dinky rowboat because the beach is across the inlet and we have to row there. Keep in mind, the sky is pitch black at this point, so I reluctantly agree to get on the boat, and we start our journey across the pitch black fucking ocean. I'm having a nervous breakdown the entire time, but we make it to the beach and join the fire with the other kids. We then pitch a tent and have a great time. Everything was fine. The next morning, we wake up and pack our things. We decided to take a walk down the beach to see another spot before we row back. Just as we round the corner of this rock beside where we pitched the tents, I see this massive fucking fish I cannot identify. It is at least 10 feet long, and it has a jaw-sized bite taken out of the side of it. It had washed up at some point in the middle of the night because the other kids swore it was not there before sunset when they arrived. It took her a solid hour to coax me back into the boat to get back to the house. I was fucking terrified. My best friend and I once illegally climbed a mountain in northwestern Oregon with our dogs. We started off parked in a no trespassing zone on an abandoned logging road. We hiked along a long, overgrown trail that we were absolutely not supposed to be on. I'm gonna go ahead and blame it on us being young and dumb, but yeah, I know it was a bad plan. Nobody knew where we were, and it would have taken quite the rescue mission to even locate our car. We made it to the summit. We spent some time fucking around and eating lunch up there. Then we decided to head back down, but we needed more water because we had drank more than we thought we could. Again, young and dumb. We heard the sound of running water about an hour into our trek down. We ended up having to hack through a bunch of devil's club and stinging nettles to even get close enough to filter it. We and our dogs were getting scraped to shit. We chopped our way into a random clearing, and there was a pile of animal skulls and bones just sitting right in the middle of it. The clearing was probably 12 feet around, and the pile was at least 4 feet tall. There was a main stalk of devil's club, maybe 5 to 6 feet tall, and 3 or 4 inches around, stuck firmly into the earth in the center. The bones were stacked around it almost vertically and caught on the thorns. It had a raccoon skull sitting precariously on the top. I'm surprised I was not dumb enough to grab one of the bones and end up with a cursed souvenir, but we were spooked. There were also ripped up shreds of fabric stuck and tied onto the trees surrounding the clearing. They were like the kind that comes from a windbreaker, so nylon maybe. I don't find bones themselves inherently creepy by any means, but an intentional, outdoor collection that seemed to be maintained and deliberately placed. Yeah, no fucking thank you. No idea to this day what that was or who put it there, but we talked about it all the way back. I can't stress enough how abandoned this trail was. We had to cut trees off the road just to get to the head of it, and we did not see another car or human that entire day. The thing is, it didn't look like something that could have been there for a few years. Seriously, a single winter storm would have knocked it down, which means someone must have been through here recently and set this shit up. The way they were stacked so precisely and vertically still gives me chills just thinking about it. My aunt and my sister and my dad were visiting, and we were exploring at a nearby area. Not a secluded area, but had large areas of forest. It was at the edge of town, and only a few abandoned buildings / sheds around. We saw old stone stairs just leading into the woods. They were really cool looking, so we were taking pictures on them. We then went farther up on them because we were curious where they went and what they were. They finally just ended, all crumbled, but there was a clearing. There was one of those white crosses with old flowers and gifts decorating it. It was like the ones people put on the side of the road when someone dies in an accident. There was a girl's name carved into it. My aunt, in her 60s at the time, a grounded person, not a paranormal buff or anything, kept saying, "Something terrible happened here, and it is so awful." The rest of us guessed it must have been an accident from hiking or something. My aunt was really sad and kept saying how horrible she felt. When we got home, I looked up the name on the internet, and it was a girl who was pregnant that was lured there by her boyfriend and viciously murdered. The article had said, one of the most gruesome murders in the state. My aunt just said, "I knew something terrible happened there. I could just feel it." When my sister looked back at the pictures we took on the stairs, there were multiple pictures with big orbs floating in them. My sister has a nice camera and takes pictures as a hobby, so has taken many pictures with her camera and never had orbs before. None of the orbs were in any of the pictures before the stairs or any of the other days we were out there taking pictures. They were very clearly there and were anywhere from golf ball size to cantaloupe size with clearly defined edges. They were like a milky white / grey color. It was daytime when they were taken. This took place in Phoenix, Arizona. This incident took place around 6 months ago. It was on an overnight trip into the Superstition Mountains, which are about an hour drive east of Phoenix. I am not going to specify the exact trail. This particular trail I was taking was an 8-mile loop through a canyon. It was a pretty simple in and out overnight trip. I had planned to go with my friend, but he cancelled. I decided to brave it on my own. I did not arrive at the trailhead until around 5:45 because of some trouble. For those of you who do not backpack, this is a very big no-no. I had about a 4-mile hike until I arrived at my planned camping spot. It was getting dark and fast too. I figured if I moved quick enough, I could get at least 2 to 3 miles in before I had to find a spot. This strategy left me hiking a very dark trail on my own with about 15 miles of dirt road between me and anyone else. Hiking in the dark by itself is scary, especially for where I was and being on my own. Eventually, it got so dark that I could only see where my headlamp was pointing. That is when I figured I needed to stop and get a camp set up. I ended up in a less than ideal spot due to low light and rushing. I did notice that there were some burnt pieces of wood and the remains of a fire circle, so it looked like people had been there before. It didn't look like it was recently though. My first priority was to get a fire going. I scanned the area around me and was able to find some dry wood, and I got the fire going. I got my tarp set up and cracked open a can of food. My camp was now set up and my food was on the fire. The feeling of uneasiness from the hike in had almost gone away, but it was still there. To fully understand what happened, I have to explain to you how my camp was set up. The site I had picked was a small clearing, surrounded by large pine trees, with the trail about 30 feet to my left. When you're in the woods and have a fire going, the fire casts a circle of light around it, and everything on the edge of that circle and past it are pitch black. I was sitting on the ground near my fire, eating my dinner, when a small rock about the size of a marble was thrown into my camp. I looked at the tiny rock in shock, as I was positive that I was the only person on this trail that night. I immediately turned my light on and towards the area where I had seen the rock come from. Due to the density of the pines and brush, I could only see about 10 feet. I spent the next 15 minutes in disbelief as I scanned the tree line that surrounded me, searching for whatever or whoever had thrown the rock. I did not dare stray too far away from my fire, which in hindsight only offered me a false sense of security. After sitting back down and spending the rest of my time on high alert, I was able to convince myself that I had somehow kicked the rock or it had fallen from a tree. I went to sleep that night, not expecting the pure terror that was about to unfold. I woke up to the sound of rustling leaves. If you weren't listening out for it, it was pretty easy to miss. I was still in a daze of sleep as I listened. The rustling of leaves got harder to hear as I assumed they were moving away from me. I went to grab my handheld flashlight that I had, but the more I looked for it, the more scared I became. I came to the realization that it was no longer there. I stood up in my sleeping bag and ducked out of my tarp and looked around. I was able to see a light off in the woods. It could not have been more than 15 feet away. It was my flashlight, laying on the ground in a pile of leaves. This is one of the few moments in my life where I have almost shit my pants. The flashlight that I had left sitting right next to me when I had fallen asleep a few hours ago was now 15 feet away from me, past the tree line in the woods. I hurriedly slipped my boots on, clutching my knife in my other hand and keeping my head on a swivel. I weighed up my options. Option 1, stay here and wait out the night. Or option 2, attempt the 3-mile hike back to the car in the dark. I figured that whatever or whoever was out there with me was going to have a tactical advantage if I was out on the trail without the light. Because of this, I decided to stay at the camp and wait out the night there. Eventually, it came back. I could hear it walking through the woods. It was far off, but I could hear it. It sounded like someone leisurely walking by, like they were on a stroll without a care in the world. Sometimes, it would walk too far away, and I would lose the sound of its steps. But then, an hour or two later, it would return, still as faint as ever. This went on for about 3 or 4 hours. I listened to the steps get closer and closer, until they were about 7 feet away from me. At this point, the fire had gotten very small, as I had run out of wood in my pile. The footsteps stopped, and everything just went totally silent. I sat there, still, for 2 hours, clutching a knife in my hand, and prayed that I would not hear anything else. I stayed like that until the sun cast enough light that I could see that I was alone in my campsite. I packed my things and speed-walked the 3 miles back down the trail I had taken. I arrived at the empty dirt road, where my car was parked, and nearly sprinted to it. I unlocked it, jumped in, and just drove. I did not stop until I had put at least 20 miles between me and that place. I stopped at a gas station in Apache Junction to buy a drink. As I exited the store, I was able to read what was written in the dust on the back window of my car. It just said, "Sleep well," with a question mark. A lot of weird things have happened to me on my various adventures through Arizona, but this is the weirdest and scariest by far. There is a seriously deranged person living in the Superstition Mountains. At least, I hope it's a person. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the stories. The goal for the channel is 100k, so please subscribe, like, and leave a comment because it really helps the channel. Thank you for watching.